My name is Haley, and I am 31 years old. I live in Portland, Oregon, and I work as a pediatric nurse. I am also the person my family calls whenever something needs to be covered, fixed, arranged, or paid for. So, when the Zermatt trip came together, I was the one who put everything on my card. Flights, resort, chalet, and insurance, more than $26,500. I was told everyone would settle up later. But 3 days before the flight, my mother returned my card. Brooke decided you and Mia aren't coming, she said. My father, Robert, sat in his usual armchair in the living room, hiding behind a newspaper. He didn't say a word. He didn't even look up as my mother threw my card on the table. His silence was the loudest betrayal of all, a quiet, cowardly permission for Brooke to erase me and his only granddaughter from the family. Brooke had spent weeks poisoning their minds, convincing our parents that I'd graciously volunteered to stay back and work extra shifts so the rest of the family could enjoy the trip. She promised them that her new sponsorships would eventually pay them back double. They weren't just being cruel, they were being played by a master manipulator. Have you ever felt like the invisible one in your own family? Let me know your story down in the comments. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community and who is standing with me and Haley tonight. I stood in the shadow of the hallway watching Mia in her room. She was 7 years old, full of a bright, uncomplicated light that I had spent my entire adult life trying to protect. She was currently attempting to shove a pair of fluffy pink mittens into her small backpack, her tongue poking out in concentration. Every few seconds, she'd look at the countdown calendar she'd made on her wall, the one with the little hand-drawn snowflakes leading up to our flight to the Swiss Alps. "Almost there, Mommy," she whispered, not seeing me. "The mountains are going to be so big." My chest felt like it was being crushed by a cold, invisible hand. My mother, Stephanie, had just stood on my porch and told me that my daughter's face was an inconvenience. That Mia's presence would ruin the aesthetic of my sister Brooke's brand deals. She'd handed back my bank card with the same casualness she'd used to return a library book, completely unbothered by the fact that I had just finished a 12-hour shift at the hospital. This was the pinnacle of injustice, a calculated act of betrayal designed to keep me in my place, as the family's subordinate. I walked into the kitchen and sat down at the wooden table. The air was still heavy with the scent of the rain outside and the lingering clinical smell of sanitizer on my scrubs. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel like I could. There was only a terrifying, crystal clear clarity. This wasn't a family drama anymore. It was a balance sheet, and I was looking at a massive deficit in respect. I opened my laptop and pulled up my banking app. I stared at the pending transaction, that staggering sum that was the cost of their dream vacation. The first-class flights, the luxury chalet in Zermatt, the private ski instructors, and the gourmet catering. The one with the steady career. The one who could always be counted on to front the cost and wait months or years to be paid back. I started a new spreadsheet. I titled it The Ghost Investor. I began scrolling back through the last 4 years of statements. It was a ledger of my own exploitation. I had been a strategic saver, working double shifts in the pediatric unit and putting every medical supply reimbursement on travel reward cards for years. That was how I had meticulously built up that cash reserve and those 500,000 miles. $9,000 to Brooke to rebrand her social media when she lost a major sponsor. $12,000 for my mother's medical emergency that turned out to be a cosmetic procedure at a private clinic. $5,000 here for Brooke's apartment deposit. $3,000 there for Tyler's failed tech startup. By the time I reached the bottom, the number staring back at me was over $100,000. I had been the silent investor in their version of family. I was the person they called to fix their mistakes, cover their debts, and fund their luxury, while I lived in a modest apartment and wore the same 3 pairs of scrubs for 3 years. I had worked nights in the pediatric unit, watching babies struggle for every breath, while they were out at 5-star dinners, probably laughing about how easy it was to get me to foot the bill. They didn't see me as a sister or a daughter. They saw me as a common resource, a utility that never turned off. Brooke was a key opinion leader. She sold perfection to millions of people. But that perfection was a subscription, and I was the one footing the bill. The Zermatt trip was going to be her biggest reveal yet. and I was expected to stay home and pay for the privilege of being erased from the frame. I stared at the glowing screen until my eyes burned. The survival mechanism that told me to just keep the peace, it didn't just break, it evaporated. Anger wasn't loud this time, it was clinical. This wasn't revenge, it was accounting. I didn't reach for a tissue, I reached for my phone. For years, I had lived in a prison without iron bars, where my own kindness was the lock. Psychologists call it the fawn response, a survival mechanism, where a child learns to be useful just to feel safe or loved. I had spent my entire life trying to be the perfect daughter and the supportive sister, thinking that if I paid enough of their bills, I would eventually earn a permanent seat at the table. But looking at that spreadsheet, I realized I wasn't family to them. I was an unpaid employee. My compassion was a luxury they had overdrafted for years, and tonight, the account was officially closed. At 12:03 a.m., while the rest of the house was silent, I began the process of digital severance. I contacted the fraud department and explicitly reported unauthorized use of services and identity misrepresentation. I made it clear that while the initial booking was mine, my financial identity had been hijacked by third parties who were now using my credit for travel I no longer authorized. This wasn't a refund request. It was a formal report of financial takeover. I didn't just cancel the bookings. I flagged the entire $26,500 transaction as fraudulent with my bank. Since the names on the tickets no longer matched the authorized traveler, the bank, initiated an immediate chargeback. To the airline and the resort, Brooke was now attempting to travel on stolen funds. Since I had booked every single part of this massive expense through my personal accounts to earn the points, I held the master keys to their kingdom. I logged into the airline portal first. I didn't cancel the flights, not yet. I simply changed the primary contact email to a new, secure one and updated the passwords. I did the same for the luxury chalet in Zermatt. I removed Brooke and Stephanie as authorized guests and updated the check-in requirements to require my physical identification and the original credit card for entry. Then, I turned my attention to the bank card my mother had so smugly returned. I knew they had the card numbers saved in their digital wallets for emergencies, which usually meant designer snow gear or $500 bottles of wine. I opened my banking app and didn't just freeze the card, I reported it stolen. I added a high-priority fraud alert to my entire profile. Any attempt to process a transaction using those saved numbers would now trigger an immediate block and a notification to my phone. I looked at the clock, 12:15 a.m. In less than 30 minutes, I had dismantled the infrastructure of their entire vacation. I felt a strange, cold peace. It wasn't a breakdown, it was a balance sheet being settled. My whole life, they had counted on me being too sensible or too loyal to push back. They weren't shocked by what they had done to me and Mia. They were going to be shocked that I had finally stopped playing along. I pulled up the rideshare app Brooke used, which was still linked to my family account. I saw her pre-booked car scheduled for 4 a.m. to take them to the airport. I sat there in the dark, the blue light of my laptop reflecting off my face, watching the little car icon on the map. Mia was in the next room, dreaming of mountains she would never see with people who didn't want her there. I looked at her door and made a silent promise. This was the last time she would ever have to make herself smaller to help me hold someone else's cruelty. Inside, my laptop glowed with a different kind of sunrise, the kind made of facts, numbers, and quiet retribution. I watched the notifications scroll across my phone from my kitchen in Portland. It was 4:45 in the morning. The rideshare I'd deliberately left active had just completed the drop-off at the international terminal. I could almost see Brooke, dressed in her curated Alps-bound outfit, leading our mother and Tyler toward the first-class check-in like they were royalty. They weren't royalty. They were just high-end squatters in a vacation they couldn't afford. At 5:15 in the morning, the first red flag appeared on my screen. Invalid login attempt. Then another. Brooke was at the kiosk, her face likely contorting with that familiar, ugly entitlement when the world doesn't bend to her thumbprint. She thought it was a technical glitch. In her mind, I was a permanent infrastructure, as reliable as the power grid. She couldn't conceive of a world where her primary utility me had finally been shut off for non-payment of respect. Instead of calling me to apologize or even to ask what happened, Brooke did exactly what a narcissist does when their power is threatened. She escalated. I received a security verification ping from the airline's customer service portal. She was on the phone with a representative, calmly and clearly claiming to be Haley. She provided my social security number, my date of birth, and the security answers she had harvested from years of me handling our family paperwork. This was the aesthetics of cruelty in action. She was willing to erase my very identity to protect her itinerary. She convinced the agent that I had been hacked and needed to override the system to secure the trip. Then, the kill shot. She didn't just regain access to the $26,500 bookings. She went for the reserves. I watched as 500,000 miles, 10 years of my life spent on red-eye flights, and hospital transfers were drained in an instant. She used them to upgrade the entire group to the presidential suite at the Zermatt Resort. She was building a digital palace out of my stolen time, all for the sake of a 3-second room tour for her followers. She likely used her influencer status to charm the resort staff, promising them a global shout-out to her followers in exchange for waiving the immediate credit card deposit, a classic move from her narcissist playbook. I sat in the blue light of my Portland kitchen, watching the digital ink dry on her crime. It was now 3:00 a.m. in Portland, but the midday sun was already high over the Alps on Brooke's livestream. I watched her toast to her success with a glass of champagne, oblivious to the fact that while she was starting her day in luxury, I was ending her charade from half a world away. I didn't stop her. I didn't call the airline to reverse it. Every transaction she authorized as Haley was a fresh entry on a criminal rap sheet. This wasn't a family dispute anymore. It was identity theft and wire fraud. She thought she was winning because she had the boarding passes. She didn't realize that in my world, we call this discovery. She wasn't an influencer on a holiday. She was a suspect in an international fraud case. I picked up my phone and sent a one-word text to my lawyer, Benjamin. Bingo! Benjamin arrived at my house at 10 o'clock sharp. He didn't bring coffee this time. He brought a heavy leather portfolio and a digital recorder. As a civil litigation attorney, he was used to the messiness of human greed. But the look on his face told me Brooke had surpassed his expectations. I have the audio from the airline's security department, Benjamin said, setting his laptop on the kitchen table, where my ghost investor spreadsheet was still glowing. He pressed play. Brooke's voice filled the room, sharp, confident, and utterly devoid of hesitation. "Yes, this is Haley," she told the representative. She rattled off my date of birth and my social security number with the practiced ease of someone who had spent a lifetime treating my identity as her own personal property. She sounded more like me than I did sometimes, especially when she demanded the mileage override for the inconvenience. Benjamin paused the recording. "Haley, this is no longer a family disagreement over a ski trip," he said, his voice cold and professional. By providing your protected information to override a financial system and seize 500,000 miles, she has committed identity theft and wire fraud. Because the transaction involves international travel and a Swiss-based resort, we are looking at criminal charges that cross borders. I leaned back, staring at the empty chair where my sister used to sit during Sunday dinners. I realized then that Brooke was suffering from an illusion of power from an empty wallet. For years, she had built a brand on perfection, but that perfection was a hollow shell. She didn't actually have a luxury life. She was merely renting one, using my character and my bank account as collateral. Without my $26,500 and my 10 years of accumulated miles, Brooke was a zero. She was so desperate to maintain the facade for her followers that she was willing to trade her freedom for a presidential suite. "What do you want to do?" Benjamin asked, sliding a set of documents toward me. "We can file the civil suit for the money, or we can submit this evidence to the authorities and trigger a criminal investigation." I didn't think about the family bond my mother always used as a weapon, to keep me silent. I thought about Mia's little hand-drawn snowflake sitting in a trash can in the next room. I thought about the 10 years of night shifts I had worked to earn those miles, hours spent comforting sick children while Brooke was out taking selfies. "File both," I said, my voice steady and lethal. I picked up the pen and signed my name. This wasn't a breakdown. It was a foreclosure on a life Brooke had never actually earned. I wasn't her sister anymore. I was the one calling in the debt. I pulled up Brooke's Instagram on my phone. The red live icon was pulsing like a heartbeat. There she was, standing on the balcony of the presidential suite in Zermatt, the Matterhorn rising majestically behind her. She looked perfect designer ski gear, pristine makeup, a glass of champagne in her hand. She was telling her 300,000 followers about the blessing of family and the importance of manifesting your dreams. "It's all about the aesthetic of luxury," she cooed into the camera. "When you work as hard as I do, you deserve the best." I watched the comments scroll by hearts, fire emojis, people telling her how much they admired her life. They didn't know the aesthetic was funded by the 12-hour shifts of a pediatric nurse who wasn't even invited. Then there was a knock. It wasn't the soft tap of room service. It was the heavy, rhythmic thud of authority. Brooke's smile faltered for a fraction of a second before she recovered. "Oh, that must be the private chef," she told her audience. She walked toward the door, her phone held high to capture the moment of her VIP treatment. She opened the door, and the aesthetic of her life shattered in 30 seconds. 3 officers from the Swiss police stood there, their uniforms a stark contrast to the gold-leafed foyer of the suite. Behind them stood a representative from the resort's security team. The Swiss police weren't there because of a family spat in Oregon. They were there because the resort's internal system flagged Brooke for theft of services the second the presidential suite's security deposit failed to authorize on my frozen card. In Zermatt, luxury isn't a gift, it's a contract, and Brooke had just broken it. "Brooke Henderson?" the lead officer asked. His voice was clinical and carried perfectly over the live stream. "Yes," Brooke said, her voice climbing an octave. "I'm in the middle of a broadcast for my brand. Is there a problem?" "We are here to investigate a fraud alert regarding the credit card and identity used to secure this suite, and the flights to Zermatt," the officer stated. "The account holder, Haley, has reported identity theft and unauthorized use of 500,000 miles." The comments on the screen went from hearts to question marks in an instant. Brooke's face went pale, then a furious, blotchy red. "This is a mistake," she shouted, forgetting her curated persona. "Haley is my sister. I didn't steal anything. Her money is family money. What's hers is mine." "Is that an admission that you used her identity to bypass security overrides?" the officer asked, stepping into the room. "I have the right," Brooke shrieked, lunging toward the officer. "I am the one who makes this family look good. She owes me." The officer didn't argue. He simply gestured to his partner. The last thing Brooke's 300,000 followers saw before the phone hit the floor was their icon being restrained, while our mother, Stephanie, screamed in the background about how Haley was ruining everything. The screen went black. The perfection was over. I picked up my phone and sent one final message to Brooke's blocked number, knowing she'd see it eventually in a cold room somewhere. "The bill has finally come due, Brooke." I set the phone down on my kitchen table and looked at the clock. It was exactly 6 o'clock in the evening in Zermatt. For the first time in my life, the balance sheet was perfectly even. Brooke spent 48 hours in a Swiss holding cell before the legal machinery Benjamin set in motion brought her back to face federal charges in the United States. My mother and Tyler were evicted from the resort within 2 hours of the arrest, left to figure out their own way home from a foreign country, without my $26,500 to cushion the fall. By the time they landed back in Portland, I had already changed every lock on my doors and blocked every one of their numbers. Benjamin worked tirelessly with the credit card companies and the airline. They restored my 500,000 miles and issued a full refund for the bookings Brooke had hijacked. But the real victory wasn't the money or the points. It was the silence. The frantic, self-serving noise of my family had finally been replaced by a peace I hadn't known since I was a little girl. 1 month later, I took Mia to Zermatt for real. We stood on a quiet trail overlooking the village, and I watched her face light up as she saw the Matterhorn for the first time. The small scar on her cheek, the one my family wanted to hide from the world, glowed in the sunlight. She looked at me and said, "Mommy, the mountains are even bigger than I dreamed." I squeezed her hand, knowing she would never again have to ask for permission to be seen. I've come to realize that for people like us, the ones who have always been the reliable ones, the ghost investors in other people's happiness, our kindness can often become our own prison. This is a letter to those of you who have always felt like you're on the edge, the ones who are only valued when you are useful. Setting a boundary isn't an act of revenge, it is an act of reclamation. You are not a resource to be mined, you are a person to be respected. Forgiveness isn't always about reconciling with the people who hurt you. Sometimes, the only person you need to forgive is yourself for letting them treat you that way for so long. This wasn't about a ski trip. It was about the sovereignty of the self. I chose to build a legacy of respect for my daughter, a world where she knows that love that requires the sacrifice of your dignity isn't love at all. If you find yourself in a similar situation, remember that your value is not a financial transaction. You have the right to walk away from anyone who sees your heart as a balance sheet to be exploited. If Haley's journey has helped you realize that your kindness should never come at the cost of your self-respect, please subscribe to support the channel. Share this with someone who needs the strength to draw their own line. I looked at the refund confirmation on my screen, then at Mia's room where she lay dreaming of snow. I whispered a new promise into the quiet night. We're going, baby. Just you and me. No influencers, no fake smiles, just the real mountains. For the first time, I wasn't just paying for a trip. I was investing in our freedom. You are not alone, and you have every right to protect what is yours.